Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Lots to talk about this week, but we are going to focus our discussion on the death of John Horgan, BC's 36th Premier. The week has been dominated by this news as people remember, pay tribute to John Horgan, tell stories of John Horgan, one of, if not the most popular Premier in modern BC history. We're going to talk about John Horgan and his impact on BC politics today on the show with the panel. Allie Blades, Jeff Ferrier, Jillian Oliver here. As always, let us begin with just talking a bit about your view on the loss of John Horgan. Lots of people have had opinions about how quickly and how sort of suddenly and how caught off guard they were. We knew that he had suffered a third round of cancer. He announced that while he was ambassador to Germany, that he was undergoing treatment for that, but it wasn't widely known how that was going. And his death, I think, caught a lot of people off guard, and they felt a lot of emotion for having lost him, this consequential figure in BC political history, without sort of knowing it was coming and dealing with that. Jeff, what are your views on that news this week?
Well, the death of John Horgan is a devastating loss for his wife and his two sons, who lost a husband and father, and his extended family. Huge loss to colleagues and those who knew him and worked with him. They lost a wonderful friend. And to British Columbians, who lost a statesman, a real leader, a real political leader. You know, in an age of where politics is so vacuous, and we can, I bet the four of us could do every political debate, every political volley between all the parties, probably by ourselves, each one ourselves. John Horgan was this rare phenomenon where he didn't act the part of Premier, but he embodied it, and it was an unvarnished and unapologetic real person, that John from Langford that everyone's talking about. So we've lost a true servant leader, and we've lost a good man with an enormous heart and so much left to give.
Mm-hmm. A lot of tributes. Allie, I heard one from John Rustad. He came up and chatted with some members of the media, talked about how John Horgan was the kind of guy who you wanted to have a beer with, which is sort of one of those ultimate litmus tests we talk about in BC politics. If you can achieve that in the minds of the voters, you've done something right.
Yeah, when we talk about politicians, we talk about what they need to be, characteristics that they need to show, how they need to dress, all of these things. But in my observation of John Horgan, he was very authentically himself throughout his entire leadership. And we saw that in fun moments where he would dress up as like Star Trek characters. We saw him get very angry at some points, but I think we as people from the outside loved seeing that, because of course you're in a debate, things get heated, you're passionate about your community, which he definitely was. He was a lifelong servant to his community and to BC. And so, of course, you get upset and say things that are unparliamentary. And I think that was like the best part of him. If he was angry, it was for a good reason. If he was happy, everyone would definitely know it. And in all of the stories that I've heard throughout the week, it was, we would spar, we would talk about things, and we would try to figure things out, and we would debate. But then we would go play basketball after work, or go and throw a lacrosse ball around. And so I think that's really hard to see in politics, because we're always like so on and trying to show a certain part of you that we think that voters want to see. But with John, it was very much, he was incapable not being himself, which was the best part.
Yeah, you would spar with John Horgan, and I will admit that has occurred with me on a few occasions, including in opposition, when, you would ask him a challenging question and he would just sort of blow up at you and question your motives and what you're trying to do. And I remember he ended one scrum with, I think you've got enough to screw me with, so I'll go now. And then off he went, And then you'd get a phone call later, or a text or something, and he'd be like, "Oh man, sorry about that. I got a little heated, and he'd sort of patch it up, which sounds simple, but my goodness, so few people do that in politics. They view it as a sign of sort of weakness, and they never kind of reach back out. So I've always admired that about him. And I think that's why he was able to maintain his kind of cross-partisan relationships that he was, people would often hear from him after a heated question period or in the hallway or that kind of thing. He'd phone up people on the other side. So there's a lot of stories of that. Jillian, what's your sort of view on the loss of John Horgan?
Well, I think, certainly it caught a lot of people by surprise. And I think that, the other side of that is that it felt like he had so much more to offer the world. And it's a loss, obviously tremendously on the personal front for everyone who knew him, but there was so much more work that I think people thought that he would be doing, having only been appointed ambassador a couple of years ago. And he just was such the type of leader that we need more of. And it's really, hard to see that, to see him go in that regard.
Only 65.
Yeah.
I mean, we assume he was older, but he was only 65.
Yeah. And I think, he saw the province through some really challenging times. His other kind of moniker was Premier Dad. And I think that came from obviously, the dad jokes and his persona, but also being our premier during the pandemic, which was a really scary time. And I think, BC was one of the places that held together the best in the world, I think, because of that steady hand that he provided. And I think that that's why we're seeing such an emotional response from people across the board, because they really did have a personal connection with him, because, he made us feel safe and well taken care of during one of the hardest times that we've ever been through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a calming presence, with Dr. Henry during the pandemic. A lot of people found comfort in John Horgan still being there, kind of talking to the public. So yeah, I agree with that. It's tough when we talk about legacy. We have often talked about this in the past, the time it takes to really settle someone's legacy. You think of Gordon Campbell, the way he left, and years and years required to be able to look back at him. Christy Clark as well. I think John Horgan, it was a little bit different. He chose to leave. Maybe we have an easier time in sort of placing him within what his personal and political legacy might be. Jeff, when the word legacy comes up and we talk about that, what do you think of John Horgan and his lasting legacy?
Yeah, it's a rich legacy. In my opinion, John Horgan will go down as the best and most successful BC NDP premier ever. On the political side, all he did was take the party from the wilderness of opposition to government in 2017 after forming a consequential governing agreement with the BC Greens. 2020 became the first NDP premier to be re-elected in government to a majority government, secured a decisive win.
Ever.
Yeah. Made inroads into places the NDP had never made inroads before. Langley, Chilliwack, Abbotsford, really, and dominating performances in Surrey and Richmond. And he became more popular as time went on. It's like the more everyday people got to know this John from Langford guy, the more they liked him. And I was always struck with what even the harshest political critics of him would say, yeah, but he's a good guy. On the policy side, big things, $10 a day childcare, work in progress, but the first new social program in generation, the province's first significant climate action strategy, First Nations law reform with the passage of UNDRIP, got big money out of politics, delivered on pocketbook issues that mattered to working class, so tolls off bridges, healthcare premiums gone. And Jillian touched on his leadership through the crisis. But I think as we reflect on his legacy, I'm reminded of one of his memorable lines that the power of salmon is in all of us. Mm-hmm. Now, with all due respect to salmon, I'd suggest that the power of Horgan is in all of us. And maybe that's his lasting legacy. And what I mean by that is quite simply, should we choose to use it, we all have the ability to face life's trials without becoming embittered, to remain focused on making the world around you a little bit better place, and to do so with courage and good humor and a sense of purpose. And if more of us could summon that, even a fraction of that, our province and our world would be a better place, and that's a legacy worth aspiring to.
Mm-hmm. More salmon, more power of the salmon.
Well, I don't even remember why he said that. But
I don't know either. Not sure.
He did a lot of work to protect wild salmon. He worked with Adam Olson on that when I was
amazing.
In, and he did a ton of work on habitat restoration. And
we should absolutely protect those wild salmon.
Allie, what do you think of legacy for John Horgan, the sort of professional, personal, sort of lasting impact he might have on BC politics?
Well, very quickly, Jillian had mentioned that he was known as our premier dad. More specifically, I always kind of think of him as a 90s sitcom dad. Like, he was just like the perfect archetype for all of it. He's so funny and offered great advice and was a great mentor to a lot of younger MLAs. And I've heard these stories of, Adrian Dix knew him for 37 years in the political trenches, right? And that's a long time to work with someone. And how special is that? But I think about the uniqueness of John Horgan and how he was able to deliver things in a way that's policy, in a way that I don't think anybody else could have really done it. And one of those examples is when he took out big money from election donations. It's forever going to change how political parties accept donations and the framework of these large checks being given for access to politicians and whatnot. And he leveled the playing field. And he was able to do that because there was a trust in him that we had. And I think that like nobody else would have been able to, essentially, because it would have been seen as favoritism for his party or for any like political gain or something like that. But no, he honestly did it. And I truly believe this because he thought that this was going to be good policy. This was going to be something that would help British Columbians just even the playing field for political parties and remove these like big names from having more influence than the single mother just trying to get by. And so I think about that and to Jillian's point, he got us through like these big challenges with there were a lot of natural disasters that happened in his last period as premier. And then when I think about how he took us through COVID, and you saw premiers from every other province on screen every single day, he didn't. He was like, you know what, this isn't about me. I need someone who people will trust, and that was Bonnie Henry. And so then he made that decision to make sure that we saw a trusted doctor in every day. And I think that was also a big sign of it wasn't about him and his ego. It was what was best for the province. And you never really know how you're going to respond to these big challenges until you're faced with them. And that's leadership. And that's, I think, one of the best things about getting through the pandemic was he's put all of the right people in those right positions that was best for us on the other side, no matter how it made him look.
And I agree with you on the reforming political donations thing. That's been an excellent backstop to the massive influence of big companies, rich donors and unions just kind of coming in with giant checks. He did flip-flop on the issue of per vote subsidies from the public from the election into the thing, but he carried it through. He said he wasn't going to do it, and then he did it, and then he's like, this is a better way to do it, and I'm going to argue it, and he argued it, and it worked. And so he had the ability to change his position too, which we might talk a bit about. The art of his pivot was much more powerful and genuine than you see from politicians today. Jillian, what comes to mind when we use the word legacy in your mind?
Well, I think on the political front, he really ushered in a new kind of moderate era for the NDP and governed in such a measured way that I think it really changed perceptions of the party and has enabled a lot of trust in government to implement things like the daycare program, minimum wage, which was, more than doubled without controversy, which, when I think back to the pre-2017 era, these are things that would have been hard to imagine going over without controversy. And, was premier for 5 years without any major scandals, which was another kind of new thing for BC. A very sort of, drama-free kind of era of politics, which I think is so critical in a time where people really need to be able to trust government. And I think that's a really great legacy when I think about BC politics before and after him, just how much more kind of calm. I mean, BC politics is always going to be crazy for other reasons, but I think in terms of, government governing reasonably and in a trustworthy way, I think we've really seen a new era that's been really, really positive for our province. And then I think, on the personal side, and I'm not the first person to say this, just so unique in the way that he was a person who power brought out the best in him and he really became his best self. You see so many politicians, it either goes to their ego and they power trip or they break under the pressure because it's too much. And it really just brought out the best in him as a person. And I think that's why he came across as such a trustworthy leader, because people could really see that it wasn't going to his head and that he could handle it. And that just, the longer I'm in politics, the more rare I realize that is.
I want to just give an opportunity for everyone to sort of share a John Horgan story if you have one. Jillian, you were in the Greens at the time of the CASA agreement and all sorts of sort of consequential moments where John Horgan is very much a large presence in the election and the result of that. Does anything stand out for you?
I remember one time right around the CASA negotiations when things were kind of still getting going and there was a lot of heat. We, were getting more media requests than we could handle. There was so much to do. It was the first time government was going to change in 16 years. It was a huge breakthrough for the Greens, and him and Andrew Weaver had got to talking during that time, and one of them mentioned to the other that he had received a letter from an elementary school in East Van urging the Greens and the NDP to work together, and they decided that they just had to go. And it was super inconvenient because we needed to be in Victoria to do all this work, but they just, they said, make it happen. And we went, and they were both, and especially Horgan, just so present there with the kids and listened to them and their reasons and thanked them for being so engaged in politics at such a young age. And it was so incredible to see someone who was about to embark on like the most important part of their career with so much to think about, just like take the time to be so present with a group of kids. It was a really impactful moment for me to witness.
Yeah, it sounds like John Horgan in a nutshell. They're the kind of guy who would do something like that. He used to often get on the bus from the legislature and go all the way to Souk, just talk to people. Just that was one of his things. He'd just get on the bus and meander out to Souk and come back. He liked talking to folks and visiting classrooms and things like that. Drove a security detail nuts. Allie, did any John Horgan stories jump out to you over the years?
I was staffing Andrew Wilkinson at the time, and we had lost his poppy. And as you know, a politician seen without a poppy is the worst thing to ever happen. And so I'm scrambling everywhere trying to find a poppy. And I run into the cohort of the NDP staffers and John Horgan. I explain what had happened because they're like seeing the visible stress in my face. And he just hands me his because Andrew was going to go do something that was in front of a camera. And then he high-fived me. And I was just, this was the most perfect moment to describe who he was, because one, extremely helpful, two, just helping a girl out who was so stressed out because of this darn poppy. And this was a time where I was like quite new to politics. And so the welcome from the NDP sometimes always isn't the best when you're from the other side, but John Horgan did not care whatsoever. And so it was wonderful.
Yeah, it's a nice story. You can just see Horgan giving you the high five. He did stuff like that. That's very cool. Jeff, you probably have a cajillion stories, but can you pick one?
Well, I did debate prep with John in 2017 and in 2020, but in 2017, it was my job to make him angry. So I was the only person in the world whose job was to try and make him more angry. Anyways, we were done a session, and he had to get off to somewhere because it was in the election or right before the election. The staff were trying to pull him away, but that particular day, my son, who was 8 at the time, was with me, and John just stopped everything when he saw my boy, and just like laser focused on him and asked him everything he could about him, like, what's your name? What school do you go to? What are the things that you do that you like? And then he's like, he runs off to another room and comes back with a can of Coke and gives it to my son, who wasn't allowed to have Coke. It was too sugary, and I think I told this to John ahead of time. Then patted him on the head and went on his way, and just made the boy seem like the most important person in the room, and it paid off for him, because Gus went to school and bragged to everyone about how he got a Coke from John Horgan, and he went to all the teachers and said, "You need to vote for this John Horgan guy because he gave me a Coke." And that was in David Eby's ridings, and we won that poll. So, I think what makes me saddest about all this is that a man who was so decent and had such a big heart, who lived to give to others, most of it out of the sight of the camera. He won't get to do that stuff that he loved to do so much anymore. And this all happened so suddenly that we didn't get the chance as a province to give him our can of Coke and really say thank you and express everything that he meant to us.
Lots of memories from John Horgan. I think we've done a good job kind of talking about him. I think he would be chuffed to hear everyone saying these stories and things about him. We didn't even get into his rock tumbling, which is one of his weirdest political hobbies I've ever heard. But he liked to just go in the basement and tumble rocks and hand them out to people, these shiny rocks. It was a little bit like, so you could make a metaphor out of that for him as premier. The longer he spent in the churn of politics, the smoother he got, shinier he got. I don't know where I'm going with that, but
took off the rough edges, found his true self, and
there you go.
Look at what happened.
The wordsmith, but great. Thank you to the panel for sharing some stories about John Horgan. Thank you for watching. We will be back next week with all the latest here on Political Capital. Thanks very much. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.